CBC News is the division of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation responsible for the news gathering and production of news programs on CBC television, radio and online services. Founded in 1941, CBC News is the largest news broadcaster in Canada and has local, regional and national broadcasts and stations. News output. Television. The television news section of CBC News is responsible for the main news programs on CBC News Network and acute SEAU de l'information, as well as producing local supper-hour news programs, national news programs like the National and Latea Journal, and news, business, weather and sports information on Air Canada's in-flight entertainment. The distinctive music on all CBC television news programs was introduced in 2006. It was part of the extensive rebranding of all news programming under the CBC News title. Local news. Most local newscasts on CBC television are currently branded as CBC News. City, province name, such as a CBC News. Toronto at 6. Local newscasts on the French network are branded as Latea Journal, followed by the city or region they serve. Radio. CBC Radio News produces on-the-hour updates for the CBC's national radio stations and provides content for regional updates. The majority of news and information is aired on CBC Radio 1 and Premier Chain. Online. CBC News Online is the CBC's cbc.ca news website. Launched in 1996, it is one of the most popular news websites in Canada. The website contains exhaustive regional, national, and international news coverage as well as arts and entertainment, and sport news. Many reports are accompanied by podcasting, audio and video from the CBC's television and radio news services. Weather Centre. In November 2005, the CBC News Weather Centre was established to cover local and international weather, using in part data provided by Environment Canada. Claire Martin was hired to serve as the primary face of the Weather Centre. In April 2014, the National Weather Centre was effectively disbanded due to CBC budget cuts. Weather presenters at local CBC stations were retained, but with the added responsibility of supplying reports for the national and CBC News Network. In November 2014, citing difficulties implementing this new system, CBC announced a one-year trial content-sharing partnership with the Weather Network, the privately owned cable specialty channel, which went into effect on December 8. Under the partnership, in exchange for access to weather-related news coverage from the CBC, the Weather Network provides the national weather reports seen on the national and CBCNN daytime programming, as well as local forecasts for CBC Toronto's weekend newscasts. Apart from Toronto, weather coverage during local newscasts was not affected, and CBC Vancouver meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff continues to provide weather coverage for the Vancouver-based editions of CBC News Now on CBCNN. Most local stations will retain their weather team to provide local weather information. Johanna Wagstaff, CBC Vancouver meteorologist. Ian Black, CBC Ottawa meteorologist. John Souder, CBC Manitoba meteorologist. Kaylin Mitchell, CBC Maritimes meteorologist. Colette Kennedy, CBC fill-in meteorologist. Farah Singh, CBC Saskatchewan weather specialist. Frank Cavallaro, CBC Montreal weather specialist. Tanara McLean, CBC Edmonton, Calgary weather specialist. Programming. Television. CBC News programming currently consists of the following television programs. The national flagship news program, hosted by Peter Mansbridge. CBC News Now. The Fifth Estate, weekly news magazine. Doc Zone, flagship documentary series. The Passionate Eye, documentary series. Marketplace, consumer news magazine. The Exchange with Amanda Lang, business news program. Power and Politics, political news program. Mansbridge One-on-One, local newscasts. Radio CBC News programming currently consists of the following radio programs: World Report, Morning Newscast, The World This Hour, Late Afternoon Newscast, The World at 6, National Dinner Hour Newscast, The World This Weekend, The House, Weekly National Political Affairs Show, Local Newscasts, CBC News Standards. The CBC follows the journalistic standards and practices which provides the policy framework within which CBC journalism seeks to meet the expectations and obligations it faces from the public. Ombudsman. The CBC sets out to maintain its accuracy, integrity and fairness in its journalism. As a Canadian institution and a press undertaking, CBC set out the journalistic standards and practices and works in compliance with these principles. Balanced viewpoints must be presented through on-the-air discussions, as it is with other public and private journalistic undertakings. Credibility in the eyes of the general population is seen as the corporation's most valuable asset. The CBC Ombudsman is completely independent of CBC program staff and management, reporting directly to the President of the CBC and, through the President, to the corporation's Board of Directors. CBC News Bureau. CBC has reporters stationed in the following cities. Main cities are listed in bold, with the notation: Whitehorse, Yukon; Victoria, British Columbia; Vancouver, British Columbia; Kamloops, British Columbia; Kelowna, British Columbia; Yellowknife, Northwest Territories; Calgary, Alberta; Edmonton, Alberta; Saskatoon, Saskatchewan; Regina, Saskatchewan; Winnipeg, Manitoba; Thunder Bay, Ontario; Windsor, Ontario; London, Ontario; Sudbury, Ontario; Kitchener-Waterloo, Ontario; Hamilton, Ontario; Toronto, Ontario; Ottawa, Ontario; Montreal, Quebec; Quebec City, Quebec; Fredericton, New Brunswick; St. John, New Brunswick; Happy Valley Goose Bay, Newfoundland and Labrador; Moncton, New Brunswick; Halifax, Nova Scotia; Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island; Sydney, Nova Scotia; Corner Brook, Newfoundland and Labrador; Gander, Newfoundland and Labrador; St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador; Iqaluit, Nunavut; International London, United Kingdom; Jerusalem, Israel; Beijing, China; Washington, D.C., New York, New York. CBC also uses Satellite Bureau, with reporters who fly in when a story occurs outside of the Bureau. In the late 1990s, the CBC and other media outlets cut back their overseas operations. CBC News in other countries. From 1994 to 2000, the CBC, in a venture with Power Broadcasting, jointly owned two networks: News World International, an American cable channel that rebroadcasts much of the programming of CBC News World; Trio, an arts and entertainment channel. In 2000, CBC and Power Broadcasting sold these channels to Barry Diller's USA Networks. Diller's company was later acquired by Vivendi Universal, which in turn was partially acquired by NBC to form NBC Universal. NBC Universal still owns the Trio brand, which no longer has any association with the CBC. However, the CBC continued to program NWI, with much of its programming simulcast on the domestic News World service. In late 2004, as a result of a further change in NWI's ownership to the INDTV consortium, NWI ceased airing CBC programming on August 1, 2005. When it was renamed Current TV, it was sold to the Al Jazeera Media Network in 2013 and became Al Jazeera America. On September 11, 2001, several American broadcasters without their own news operations stations, including C-SPAN, carried the CBC's coverage of the September 11, 2001 attacks in New York City and Washington, D.C. In the days after September 11, C-SPAN carried CBC's nightly newscast, The National, anchored by Peter Mansbridge. The quality of this coverage was recognized specifically by the Canadian Journalism Foundation. Editor-in-Chief Tony Berman later accepted the Excellence in Journalism Award for rigorous professional practice, accuracy, originality and public accountability on behalf of the service. C-SPAN has also carried CBC's coverage of major events affecting Canadians, including Canadian federal elections, 6 days in September 2000 that marked the death and state funeral of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the war in Iraq. The National aired on C-SPAN each night for about 3 weeks following the start of the war on Iraq, the power outage crisis in summer 2003, key proceedings in Canadian Parliament, U.S. presidential elections. In 2004, C-SPAN picked up The National the day after the election for the view from Canadians. In 2008, C-SPAN carried the CBC's coverage of the election, state visits and official visits of American presidents to Canada, Barack Obama inauguration in 2009. With the launch of Sirius Canada in December 2005, some of the CBC's radio networks are available to Sirius subscribers in the United States. Foreign correspondents: London, Nala Ayed, Margaret Evans; Jerusalem, Derek Stoffel, Sasa Petricic; Beijing, Andrew Lee; Washington, D.C., Paul Hunter, Keith Bogue, Megan Fitzpatrick, Lindsay Duncombe; New York, Stephen D'Souza; Los Angeles, Kim Brunhuber.